The sun always rose the same way in Sadiq's village. Slowly, softly, spreading its golden light across the dusty ground where barefoot children chased each other through the morning haze. Sadiq, a thin boy of maybe 14, woke up before the first rooster crowed. His small hut stood at the edge of the market, built from clay and straw, with cracks big enough for the wind to sing through at night. Every morning, he would wash his face in a broken clay bowl filled with water he'd carried from the river. Then, with a half-smile and a hungry stomach, he would step into the marketplace where the scent of stale bread and roasted corn floated in the air. The traders barely noticed him anymore. He wasn't there to buy, only to collect what was left behind. Pieces of old bread, crushed fruit, maybe a handful of rice if he was lucky. Yet, even in this quiet struggle, there was something strange about him. He always looked content, as if hunger couldn't touch his soul. The villagers often called him the mad boy. They laughed as he bent down to gather crumbs, whispering that he'd lost his mind long ago. But Sadiq only smiled, brushing the dust from his clothes, whispering under his breath, "Madness is not when you give too much, it's when you stop feeling." By noon, the heat would shimmer like fire in the air. The streets buzzed with voices, traders shouting prices, women balancing baskets on their heads, and children playing with sticks and stones. In the middle of all this noise, Sadiq would sit near an old wooden cart, carefully breaking the bread he'd found into small pieces. One by one, the hungry children from the poorer side of the village came running. Some were barefoot, their clothes torn, their faces covered with dust, but when they saw Sadiq, their eyes lit up. He gave each of them a piece, smiling as they ate greedily. "You eat too?" one of them would ask, holding out a crumb. Sadiq always shook his head gently. "I'll eat later," he said. But everyone knew he wouldn't. It was his secret ritual. He would give until there was nothing left to give. Some of the elders frowned at him, saying, "This boy will die of hunger if he keeps feeding others." And others mocked him behind his back. Yet that didn't matter. When the children laughed with their mouths full, when their eyes brightened for a moment, Sadiq felt something warm fill his chest, something that tasted better than any food. He didn't need to be rich. He didn't even need to be full. In those moments he felt alive. As the evening came, the market began to empty. The sky turned red and purple, and the smell of smoke from cooking fires drifted through the air. Sadiq wandered through the empty stalls, picking up the last few crumbs left on the ground. He placed them carefully into a small piece of cloth, tying it into a bundle. It wasn't much, maybe enough for one meal, but he didn't seem disappointed. He sat on a rock, watching the sun sink behind the hills. His eyes reflected the dying light, full of quiet peace. He remembered his mother's words, the ones she used to whisper when they had nothing to eat. "Kindness, my son, is a seed. You plant it even when the soil looks dry. Someday it will grow." Those words stayed with him like a prayer. He looked at the sky and whispered softly, "Maybe tomorrow someone will smile because I shared today." Behind him, the faint laughter of the children still echoed, fading slowly into the sound of crickets. The world was silent except for the wind, brushing gently through the leaves, as if it too was listening to the heart of the boy who had nothing but still chose to give. That night, the moon rose bright and full over the quiet village. Sadiq lay on the ground outside his hut, his bundle of bread beside him, though he hadn't eaten any of it. He stared at the stars, tracing invisible stories with his finger, tales his mother used to tell him about kings, queens, and heroes who were remembered not for their crowns, but for their hearts. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant fires. His stomach growled softly, but he smiled anyway. Hunger had become an old friend. It no longer frightened him. He pulled his thin blanket over his shoulders and closed his eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a drumbeat echoed faintly, signaling the start of a festival in the main town. But Sadiq didn't dream of celebration or gold or riches. He dreamed of a world where no one went to bed hungry. The stars shimmered brighter for a moment, as if they were watching over him. And from the shadows beyond the huts, unseen by anyone, a figure stood quietly, cloaked and silent, watching the boy who gave his food away. The wind carried a whisper across the empty streets, gentle and almost human. That night, something had begun to change in the heart of the village, though no one yet knew it. The figure in the shadows stayed there for a long time, half hidden behind the old acacia tree near Sadiq's hut. The moonlight caught only glimpses, the edge of a torn shawl, the pale outline of a tired face. She stood silently, watching as Sadiq drifted into sleep, his small body curled under a thin blanket, his hand still clutching the cloth bundle of bread he hadn't eaten. There was something peaceful about the boy, something rare in a world that had forgotten gentleness. The woman took one slow step forward, but stopped when a dog barked somewhere in the distance. She turned away, pulling her shawl tighter against the night breeze. The stars glimmered over her as she whispered to herself, "A boy who gives in hunger. What kind of heart is this?" Then she vanished into the darkness, leaving only the faint sound of her footsteps fading into the night. When morning came, Sadiq woke to the cries of roosters and the hum of people preparing for the village festival. He stretched his arms, blinked against the sun, and smiled, unaware that the night had left him a visitor, and a destiny far greater than he could ever imagine. By midday, the village had transformed into a noisy swirl of colors and music. Drums echoed from every corner, women wore bright scarves, and children ran about chasing paper kites through the hot air. Sadiq wandered through the market with his usual calm, carrying a small empty basket on his shoulder. He wasn't there to celebrate. He was there to collect whatever food might be left behind when the festival was over. People passed him laughing, too busy to notice the quiet boy walking barefoot through the dust. But not everyone was laughing. Near the edge of the market, under the wide shadow of the tree, a woman sat slumped against the trunk. Her clothes were torn, her feet blistered, her hair tangled with dirt. Her skin glistened with sweat, and her eyes, half closed from exhaustion, looked almost lifeless. When Sadiq noticed her, he stopped immediately. The crowd walked past her as if she didn't exist. Some pointed, others murmured things like, "Another mad beggar," or "She should go back to where she came from." Sadiq felt something twist inside him, that familiar ache he always felt when he saw someone in pain. He took a step forward, then another, until he was standing right in front of her. "Mother, are you okay?" he asked softly. The woman didn't reply. Her lips trembled, her eyes flickered open for a moment, and she whispered one word, "Water." Without thinking, Sadiq ran toward the market well. He filled his clay cup and hurried back, spilling most of it along the way, but the little that remained he poured gently between her cracked lips. She drank slowly, then looked up at him with weak eyes. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice rough like sand. Sadiq shrugged, kneeling beside her. "Because you're hungry and thirsty. That's reason enough." He reached into his cloth bundle and pulled out the only piece of bread he had found that morning. Dry, small but clean. He held it out to her with both hands. The woman stared at it for a long time. "This is all you have," she said quietly. "And yet you give it to me." He smiled, his tone almost playful. "Bread tastes better when shared." She stared at him for another moment, then took the bread and ate it slowly, as if every bite carried both shame and relief. Sadiq sat beside her, watching the wind play with the dust. "People think I'm mad for doing this," he said softly, "but I think madness is when you walk past a hungry person and feel nothing." The woman smiled faintly, her tired face softening for the first time. She whispered, "The world could use more madmen like you." They sat together under the tree for a while, saying nothing more. Around them, the noise of the festival carried on, the laughter, the drums, the clinking of jewelry and plates, yet it felt far away like another world. The woman's eyes kept drifting to Sadiq's face, as if trying to read something hidden behind his calm. There was no pity there, no pride, only kindness, raw and unguarded. When she finished eating, she wiped her mouth with her sleeve and looked at him again. "What's your name, boy?" she asked. "Sadiq," he replied simply. She nodded slowly, almost to herself. "Sadiq," she repeated. tasting the word as if it meant something ancient. Then she said something strange, a line that stuck in his mind long after the day was gone. "One day, you'll see what your kindness is worth." He laughed lightly, shaking his head. "Kindness doesn't have a price, madam." But the woman didn't answer. She stood up unsteadily, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. The sun caught her face for a moment, and Sadiq noticed something unusual. Beneath the dirt and exhaustion, her features were delicate, her posture graceful, her voice gentle but firm, not like a beggar at all. Before he could ask her anything, she whispered again, almost like a secret. "One day you'll know." And then she walked away through the crowd until she disappeared behind the stalls. Evening came fast that day. The music faded, the air cooled, and the villagers began returning to their homes. Sadiq sat near the same tree, staring down the road where the woman had gone. He felt uneasy for reasons he couldn't explain. He wondered where she was sleeping, if she had more to eat, if she was safe. He didn't know why he cared so much about a stranger, but something about her words kept echoing in his mind. "One day you'll see what your kindness is worth." The sentence didn't sound like a blessing. Sounded like a promise. When night fell, he walked back to his hut, his body tired, his stomach empty. As he lay down, he thought he heard distant hoofbeats on the road, faint, rhythmic, and growing closer, but he was too sleepy to care. He closed his eyes, whispering his mother's prayer again, and drifted off. The night grew heavy and still. Somewhere beyond the village, torches moved through the darkness, their light flickering like stars fallen to the earth. Before dawn, the first shouts broke the silence. People ran through the streets in confusion, their voices trembling with fear. "The royal guards are here," someone yelled. Sadiq woke with a start, rushing outside to see what was happening. Horses lined the marketplace, their riders dressed in silver and blue armor, the emblem of the kingdom shining on their chests. The leader, a tall man with a red cape, called out in a commanding voice, "We are looking for the person who fed the queen's daughter last night." The crowd gasped, murmurs spreading like wildfire. "Queen's daughter?" someone whispered. There was a princess here. No one understood what was happening. But as Sadiq stood frozen near the tree, his heart began to pound. The words echoed in his mind, "One day you'll know." He felt his breath catch. Could it be? That woman in torn clothes and dust-covered feet. Was she? The soldiers dismounted, scanning faces, asking questions. And as the sun rose, golden light spilling across the shocked faces of the villagers, one of the guards pointed straight at him. "That's the boy," he said. "He's the one who fed her." The crowd turned to look at Sadiq. He couldn't move. The bread he had shared, the kindness he had given so freely, had somehow found its way into the heart of the royal palace. The crowd went silent as the guard's finger remained pointed toward Sadiq. He stood there barefoot, frozen in the morning sun, dust clinging to his legs, his heart thudding so loudly that he could barely hear the whispers around him. "He's the one," the guard repeated, stepping forward. Sadiq looked at the armored men, the polished horses, the royal banners fluttering above the marketplace, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly small. "What have I done?" he stammered, but no one answered him. Two guards approached, their expressions hard but not cruel, and one said, "The princess wishes to see you." The villagers gasped, "Princess?" The same people who had mocked him for years now stared at him with wide eyes. Some looked afraid, others curious, and a few even jealous. Sadiq's old friend Musa whispered, "Brother, what did you do?" But Sadiq only shook his head. "I don't know." His mind raced, the strange woman, the bread, her words. It couldn't be true. He tried to speak, but one of the guards gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll understand soon," he said. And just like that, the poor boy who once wandered the market barefoot was led through the streets beside royal horses, while his neighbors watched in stunned silence. Dust rose around his feet as they took him away, toward a destiny far grander and far stranger than anything he had ever imagined. The journey to the palace was long. The sun climbed high, burning above the open plains as the small convoy rode past fields of tall grass swaying in the wind. Sadiq sat behind one of the guards on horseback, gripping the saddle tightly, trying to steady his thoughts. The sound of hooves drummed like thunder in his ears. He looked around in awe, the endless road, the horizon stretching far and golden, the smell of the earth after last night's dew. It was all beautiful, but he couldn't enjoy any of it. Fear pressed against his chest like a heavy stone. Why would a princess ask for me? He thought. Did I offend her somehow? The woman he had fed didn't look like royalty. She looked hungry, tired, human. How could she be a princess? His thoughts tangled into confusion until the first sight of the palace broke through the haze. Rising from the hills like a dream, the royal palace shimmered with white stone towers and golden rooftops. Flags waved gently in the breeze, and fountains sparkled in the sunlight. Sadiq's breath caught in his throat. He had seen the palace only from a distance. It always looked unreachable, like something built for gods, not men. But now he was being taken inside its gates. When they arrived, the massive iron doors opened with a deep groan, and he stepped onto polished marble floors that reflected the sunlight like water. His bare feet made no sound, but his heart was pounding so loudly it seemed to echo off the walls. Inside everything glowed. The corridors were lined with carved pillars, golden curtains, and oil lamps that filled the air with the scent of jasmine and cedar. Servants stopped and stared at the dusty boy being led through the palace. Their eyes followed him, whispering behind their hands. Who is he? Why would the princess summon a peasant? Look at his clothes. Sadiq kept his head down, ashamed, though he had done nothing wrong. The guard stopped in front of a tall door inlaid with jewels. The captain turned to him. Bow your head when you enter, he said firmly. Sadiq nodded, swallowing hard. The door opened slowly, and a flood of light poured out. He stepped inside, into the great throne room. At the far end, beneath a canopy of silk, sat King Omari, broad-shouldered, regal, his robe shimmering with gold thread. Beside him sat Queen Abani, her face kind but solemn. Sadiq immediately knelt to the ground, trembling. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him. The king's voice rolled through the hall, deep and commanding. Are you the boy who fed a woman by the village road last night? Sadiq's throat felt dry. Yes, my king, he whispered. I thought she was hungry. I didn't know. You didn't know she was my daughter, the king finished for him. The boy's eyes lifted in shock. A rustle moved through the room as a smaller figure stepped forward from behind the queen's chair. It was her. The same woman. Only now she stood tall and radiant in royal robes of white and gold. Her hair was clean and braided with pearls, her skin glowing in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. But her eyes, those gentle, kind eyes, were the same ones that had looked at him under the shade of the tree. You, Sadiq whispered without meaning to. The room fell silent. Princess Zuri smiled softly, walking closer until she stood only a few steps away from him. Yes, she said, her voice calm but filled with warmth. It was me. Sadiq felt his knees go weak. I didn't know, he said again. I swear I didn't know who you were. She laughed gently. If you had known, would you still have given me your last piece of bread? He looked up at her, eyes glistening. Yes, princess. Hunger doesn't ask for names. The king leaned back in his throne, studying the boy in silence. The courtiers whispered among themselves, unsure whether this was a story of honor or insult. Zuri turned to her father. Father, last night I left the palace to see how our people live, to see what hunger feels like. No one helped me. They turned away, mocked me, or pretended not to see me. Only this boy stopped. Only he saw me as human. The king's expression softened, though his tone remained grave. You risked your safety to test the kindness of men, he said to his daughter. And you found it, in a boy with nothing. He stood, his robe sweeping the marble floor as he walked slowly toward Sadiq. Every step echoed through the hall. The boy bowed even lower, his forehead nearly touching the ground. The king stopped in front of him, his voice deep and heavy with emotion. Sadiq, son of no one, with no home, no gold, and no reason to give, yet you gave. He paused, his eyes glimmering. Tell me, boy, what made you do it? Sadiq hesitated, his voice trembling as he answered. Because no one should go to sleep hungry, my king. My mother used to say, a full stomach means nothing if your heart is empty. The hall was silent. Even the guards seemed moved. For a long moment the king said nothing. Then slowly, a small smile touched his lips. Your mother was a wise woman, he said. The queen nodded softly, her eyes moist. Princess Zuri clasped her hands together, whispering. He gave me life when I had lost faith in people. Sadiq raised his head cautiously, his eyes meeting the king's. He expected punishment, perhaps for touching the princess, or for treating her as a commoner. But instead, the king reached out a hand and placed it gently on the boy's shoulder. You are not to be punished, he said firmly. You are to be honored. Gasps filled the room. Sadiq blinked in disbelief, unsure if he'd heard correctly. The king turned to the crowd. From this day, this boy shall be the head of the royal food care program. He will oversee the kitchens that feed our poor and hungry. The courtiers murmured in surprise, some even protesting, but the king raised his hand for silence. He has fed my daughter when she had nothing. He has shown this kingdom what true nobility looks like. Let him teach us what it means to be human. Princess Zuri's eyes shimmered with pride as she looked at Sadiq, who sat speechless, overwhelmed. The hall erupted in applause, cautious at first, then thunderous. And as the sound filled the room, Sadiq felt tears sting his eyes. He wasn't dreaming. The poor boy who once gave away bread was now being given a place of honor in the palace. The same people who once laughed at his ragged clothes now bowed as he passed. But deep down, beneath the joy and disbelief, Sadiq whispered to himself the same line his mother had once said. Kindness is the only crown worth wearing. The next morning, the entire village was trembling with whispers. Dust rose like fog as the sound of hooves thundered down the dirt road. The royal guards had arrived. Their polished armor gleamed under the sun, a sight so foreign to the humble villagers that everyone froze in place. Mothers clutched their children. Shopkeepers hid behind their stalls. Only Sadiq stood still, the same way he always did, confused yet calm. One of the guards, with a voice sharp as iron, shouted, Who gave food to the queen's daughter last night? The words echoed like thunder across the market. The queen's daughter. Everyone looked at one another in disbelief. Some gasped, some laughed nervously, thinking it must be a mistake. Sadiq's mind went blank. The hungry woman. The one with torn clothes and tired eyes. No, it couldn't be. His heart pounded as the realization struck him. She wasn't an ordinary stranger. She was Princess Zuri. The guard's eyes scanned the crowd until they fell on him, the thin boy with dusty hands. They marched toward him, forming a circle. The villagers stepped back. Someone whispered, They'll arrest him. Another muttered, He must have insulted the princess. But Sadiq didn't resist. When one guard barked, You there, come with us, he simply nodded and said softly, If I did something wrong, I'll explain. The guards didn't reply. They only grabbed his arm and pushed him toward the waiting royal carriage. For the first time in his life, Sadiq was leaving the village, not to beg for food, but to face the king himself. As the carriage wheels rolled through the royal gates, Sadiq's breath caught in his throat. The palace loomed before him, massive, golden, and glowing like a dream. Walls carved with ancient symbols rose high into the sky. Marble fountains danced in the courtyard. He could smell roses and spices carried by the wind. But instead of awe, he felt small, like a grain of dust in a world that wasn't his. The guards led him through long corridors lined with silk curtains and portraits of kings and queens. Finally, they stopped before a pair of towering doors. One guard announced, The boy is here, Your Majesty. The doors opened with a slow, heavy creak. Inside, the king sat upon his throne, draped in royal blue. His beard was streaked with gray, his eyes sharp with wisdom. Beside him stood a familiar figure, the same woman Sadiq had fed the day before, only now dressed in shining gold, her face calm yet kind. Sadiq froze. She smiled faintly. The king's voice boomed. "Are you the one who fed my daughter last night?" Sadiq swallowed hard. "Yes, your majesty. She was hungry. I didn't know she was your daughter." The king leaned forward, studying him. "And yet you gave her your last meal." Sadiq nodded. "Because hunger doesn't see crowns, sir." For a moment, silence filled the hall. Then the king laughed softly, a sound full of surprise. "Most men would run after gold," he said, "but you gave your only bread." Princess Zuri stepped closer, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "Father," she said gently, "he gave me hope when I'd lost faith in our people. He didn't see a princess, he saw a hungry soul." The king's expression softened. He rose from his throne and descended the steps until he stood before Sadiq. "My daughter risked her life to know her people," he said. "And you, boy, reminded her why compassion still breathes in this land." The guards and courtiers stood stunned. The king turned to them. "Let it be known, this boy is no beggar. From today he serves the palace." Sadiq's knees almost gave way. "Serve the palace," he stammered. "Yes," said the king, "but not as a servant. As the head of something new, something this kingdom has forgotten." The king looked around the hall. "We will call it the Royal Food Care Program, and this boy shall lead it." The courtiers gasped. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some protested under their breath. How could a commoner hold such an honorable post? But the king silenced them with a gesture. "He has already proven himself more noble than most who wear crowns." That night, when the palace quieted and the stars painted the sky, Princess Zuri found Sadiq standing near the courtyard fountain, staring at his reflection in the water. His face was half lit by torchlight, half hidden in shadow. She approached quietly and said, "You're thinking of your village, aren't you?" He smiled faintly. "Yes. They must be wondering if I'm alive." Zuri sat beside him, her gown shimmering like moonlight. "You know," she said, "I disguised myself because I wanted to see if the kindness my mother spoke of still existed in our kingdom. I found it in you." Sadiq looked down. "I didn't do anything special," he whispered. "I just saw someone hungry." She shook her head gently. "That's what makes it special. People have forgotten to see." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the water's soft rhythm. Then Zuri said, "Tomorrow I'll show you the royal kitchen. You'll start your new role there." Sadiq laughed quietly. "I used to eat from behind that kitchen's walls. Never thought I'd walk inside." Zuri smiled. "Sometimes fate writes stories we never expect." As dawn crept over the horizon, Sadiq stood in the palace kitchen, surrounded by rows of cooks, spices, and endless baskets of bread. The aroma made him dizzy. A chef handed him a golden ladle and said teasingly, "The king must really like you, boy." Sadiq smiled shyly. "I'm just here to make sure no one sleeps hungry." From that moment, he worked tirelessly, counting grains, distributing meals, and sending food carts to distant villages. He learned how to organize, how to speak to nobles, how to balance kindness with authority. Yet even in his new clothes, he never forgot his old self. At night, when everyone slept, he'd take leftover bread and secretly leave it near the palace gates, for the poor who still came begging. One evening, Princess Zuri caught him doing it. Instead of scolding him, she said softly, "Don't ever stop being who you are." He smiled. "If I stop, then what's the point of this title?" They both laughed quietly under the stars. In that moment, two worlds, royalty and poverty, felt closer than they ever had before. But outside the palace walls, not everyone shared their joy. Some ministers whispered in jealousy, calling Sadiq the beggar prince. They didn't know it yet, but his simple act of kindness was about to shake the kingdom even more deeply than before. Rumors spread like wildfire through the palace corridors. The whispers grew sharper each day. The beggar boy has the king's ear now. He sits with the princess as if he belongs. Sadiq heard them all, but he stayed silent. His focus was on the people, the ones who slept hungry outside the palace walls. Every morning, carts filled with rice, beans, and bread left the royal gates, rolling toward the poorest villages. What had once been an idea had turned into a movement. Children no longer starved by the roadside. Farmers who had lost hope found grain sacks at their doors. And yet, jealousy is a stubborn shadow. It follows light wherever it shines. Some of the ministers began plotting against him, whispering in the king's chambers, "Your Majesty, this boy grows too powerful. He's turning the people toward himself, not the throne." The king would dismiss them at first, but doubt is a quiet poison. Seeps in slowly. One night, when Sadiq entered the royal kitchen, he found the atmosphere colder than usual. The cooks avoided his eyes. The guards didn't greet him. He felt it. The wind of suspicion had started to turn. But even then, when Princess Zuri walked in, smiling as always, Sadiq bowed respectfully. "You shouldn't work so late," she said gently. He replied, "People don't stop being hungry after sunset." She smiled faintly, then paused. "Be careful, Sadiq. Not everyone likes what you're changing." He nodded, understanding. "I didn't do it to be liked, Your Highness. I did it because hunger makes people forget their humanity. I just want to remind them." Her eyes softened. "And you have," she whispered. But deep down, both of them knew. Kindness had become dangerous. Days passed, and the tension thickened like a storm cloud. The minister's envy grew into accusation. One morning, the king summoned Sadiq to the throne room, his expression heavy with conflict. The guards lined the walls, and the air smelled of burning incense. "Sadiq," the king said slowly, "I hear troubling things, that you've been giving away food meant for the royal stores. That you've been holding secret meetings with the villagers." Sadiq's heart pounded. "Your Majesty," he said firmly, "every grain I've given away was from my own share. I've never stolen from the palace." The king stared at him for a long moment, eyes full of uncertainty. "You've done good things," he admitted, "but goodness must also obey rules." The words stung like ice. Sadiq bowed deeply. "Then take this title from me," he said quietly, "but don't stop feeding the people. Let that continue, even if I'm not here." Princess Zuri, who had been standing beside the throne, stepped forward in protest. "Father, please, he's innocent. I've seen it with my own eyes." But the king raised his hand to silence her. He looked at Sadiq with sorrow. "Perhaps time will prove your truth." The guards approached. Sadiq didn't resist. He simply smiled at Zuri and said softly, tell them I'm not angry." That night, he was escorted back to his village. The same road, the same dusty wind, but this time no one whispered beggar. They looked at him with tears and respect. He was no longer just Sadiq the poor boy. He was Sadiq, the one who fed the kingdom's conscience. Weeks turned into months. The royal food care program continued, but something had changed. The palace cooks followed Sadiq's methods, his routes, his kindness. Princess Zuri herself began visiting villages, dressed simply, just as he once found her. The people adored her, for she carried his spirit with her. Then one fateful morning, a messenger galloped through the village shouting, "The king calls for Sadiq." Shock rippled through the crowd. Sadiq, who had been helping a child carry water, stood frozen. When he reached the palace, he found the king frail, lying on his bed, the light of life dimming from his eyes. Princess Zuri was beside him, holding his hand. When the king saw Sadiq, a faint smile crossed his face. "I was wrong," he whispered. "You didn't steal from us. You gave us back what we'd lost. Compassion." He motioned weakly toward his daughter. "When I'm gone, she will rule, and I want you beside her." Sadiq's eyes filled with tears. "Your Majesty, I am just a servant of kindness." The king smiled faintly. then serve it forever. Those were his final words. After the king's funeral, Princess Zuri took the throne, and her first order was simple. Every table in this kingdom will have bread, and every hungry soul will have a name, not a label. She turned to Sadiq and said, "You will continue leading this mission, not as a servant, but as the kingdom's heart." And so, the beggar boy who once gave away his last roti stood beside the queen, not in robes of gold, but in the same humble spirit that began it all. People say that even today, when the palace kitchens light their fires each morning, a quiet voice echoes through the halls. Feed them not because they are poor, but because they are human. And that voice, they say, belongs to Sadiq, the boy who taught a kingdom how to feel again. Red Heart.